Happy Devil's Thursday. This is At The Point. I'm your host, Sam Wu, here with Bruce Zeman. Streaming live on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, X Live, and Twitch on the Let's Go Devils Network. Coming to you live from the Primetime Radio Studios inside the bunker in an undisclosed location in beautiful New Jersey. And somewhere down at the Delaware beach. I don't know if they call it the shore down there. Obviously they don't. It's got to be the beach. It's Delaware, the first state, as the NHL season is wrapping up rapidly. Last day of the season, the regular season of the NHL. Playoff brackets are set. We're going to be talking about surprises, disappointments this past season. We're going to talk a little playoffs. And I got some beef. It's not on the show notes, Bruce, but I got some beef.
Well, Sam, it's good to be back with you. I'm glad we're doing our show today. And, again, as you said, it is the playoff time, the regular season just about over. And good to be with you. We got a lot to talk about. NHL playoffs getting underway very soon.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Bruce. I'm gonna start off with the beef. I know we're supposed to. Here's my beef. And I know it's a lot of it's TV, and I know a lot of it is trying to figure out, which series is gonna, how everything is gonna be seeded. But my goodness, can the NHL at least give us kind of like, I don't know, somewhat of a boilerplate, framework when the playoffs, series are going to begin? Because it's like the Devils and Carolina Hurricanes, amongst other teams, is on Easter Sunday, right smack in the middle of the afternoon. And they do this all the time. In previous years, I remember going to a Hurricanes-Devils game back in, 2001 on an Easter Sunday. And it's like, I got to rearrange my schedule. And then you get one game that starts at 6 p.m. Eastern. It's already bad enough. It's on the weekday. It's 6 p.m. Eastern down in Carolina. And it's like, what are you doing? And then you got the Friday game 3 at the Rock. And it's like 8 p.m. start. It's like, okay, nice. I'll give you that. A little time after work, just to get mosey on American whiskey. We'll be on the big stage outside American whiskey, weather permitting. The Let's Go Devils podcast for Game Day Live and Devils After Dark. But it's like I have to rearrange my entire schedule, my work schedule. Like everything has to be rearranged, especially when you do this podcast. I need to know when. And they just spring it to you last second. And it's like round by round. So if the Devils are fortunate enough to move rounds with this podcast, it's like I got to take 3 months off.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. It's the schedule is crazy, and I don't know if it's because of the the last minute settings and everything, but the schedule making is less than ideal. You're completely agree with you there.
And also, there was talk, well, the Carolina Hurricanes are playing tonight. They can't start on Saturday. That wouldn't be fair. But that's what the NHL did to the New Jersey Devils after winning Game 7 against the New York Rangers a couple years ago in the playoffs. And the Devils had to beeline it down to Carolina to play Game 1. Like literally right after. Like, I think they had 1 day rest and then, boom, start the series, a 7-game series.
Yeah, it's less than ideal. Although I will say this, I don't know if I would want to be one of the schedule makers having to get all those games in a certain time frame. But you're right. I mean, the logistical problems for folks like you and me aside, I've already heard from a couple of people that are less than pleased that the Devils game is on Easter Sunday.
Well, yeah, and they've done this in the past.
Yeah.
And again, it's I believe it's 3 o'clock. I think it's 3 o'clock start on Easter Sunday. And talking to Vinny Parisi and Shorts Guy, They can't do game day live unless we do it at 8 a.m.
Right.
Before. I mean, it's just. Again, it's one of those things where I get it, whatever. But if they can move the times to more towards like 7 p.m., it wouldn't be so bad that you can spend time with your family and all that. And you and I being in the media, I mean, a lot of people don't realize the sacrifices you make covering a team. Like you miss birthdays, you miss holidays, you miss weddings. Even funerals in some extreme cases, because like when you follow a team and you cover a team, your livelihood's doing that, and like you have to plan your life around it so you can cover that team. But it's just got to suck for journalists where you just don't know when things are and where you're going to be for the next 2 weeks when it comes to playoffs, because anything can happen. Anything can happen.
Yeah. It's tough, and we've seen that, especially as you get into later rounds where stuff is done at the last minute, and you're 100% correct. It's tough, like again, telling your significant other, like, hey, guess what? I'm going to be covering the game on Easter Sunday. Usually does not go over too well.
Yeah, and Al Skates says all the more reason to cheer "Go Devils, go" during Easter Mass service. But yeah, it's all
during service. Wow.
But it's a lot of it's TV. They pay a lot of money, ESPN and TNT. They pay a lot of money to broadcast these games. They want it in a slot that makes their network the most money. And sometimes I feel that hockey plays second fiddle to their other programming. And that's why we get these like awful, I mean, I'm not a big fan of day games, but at least it's like around 3:00, 3:30. Some of these starts. So, but the Devils start their playoffs on Easter Sunday, so we're just gonna have to deal with it. But I just have beef with it, just because when you don't know, you don't know, and now that we know, it's like so secretive. And then it comes out. But I understand, like, the logistics of it. You're satisfying the building schedules. You're satisfying the TV schedules. You're satisfying even the travel schedules between the teams, all that. So, again, just going to have to roll with the punches. All right, Bruce. So on to the show after my little beef right there. Let's talk about the biggest surprises and disappointments in the NHL this season.
Yeah, so if you're looking at, I was looking at some of the storylines that we saw this season, and I thought we would talk about, maybe the biggest surprise to each of us and maybe the disappointment. And for me, the biggest surprise, I knew they were going to be good, but I think probably the biggest surprise was the outstanding season that the Winnipeg Jets had, capturing the President's Trophy and finishing atop the NHL. They had a heck of a season. If you just look at, everything they did, 56, 22, and 4, 116 points, a fantastic season. And then for me, on the other hand, if you want to talk about the biggest disappointment, would probably be the Nashville Predators. After the additions that they made in the offseason, everybody was talking about them as a legit contender, Stanley Cup contender. They didn't make the playoffs. They finished at 30, 44, and 8, and their GM, Barry Trotz, is probably trying to figure out what to do right now. But for me, that's my biggest surprise and also my biggest disappointment. I'm curious to see what you think.
I have a few of them. Some go hand in hand. I think one of the biggest surprises was the Four Nations tournament was probably one of the awesomest things they ever come up with. I mean, I had my doubts. You had your doubts, I think, in some ways. But actually, I had a lot of doubts on it. I didn't like how Team Russia was not part of that Four Nations tournament. That was kind of a disappointment to me. Also a disappointment to me was the booing of the national anthem. I'm not a big fan of it. I know a lot of people would disagree with me, but that's just how I feel. Other big surprises: the Columbus Blue Jackets. Unfortunately, they didn't make it to the playoffs, but they made a heck of a run, and they were really a sentimental favorite for a lot of people, including myself and you, Bruce. I thought
Yeah.
they were a surprise. Again, more disappointment. You said Nashville. I think the Vancouver Canucks not making the playoffs was a big disappointment as well. I wanted to see them. I wanted to see Quinn Hughes play and the Brock Ness monster as well, who may not be there next year in Vancouver. Also, the Boston Bruins. I thought they would be a lot better. The way they handled things and just tore it apart, starting with Jim Montgomery, which I'll talk to you about in a sec. Again, there was disappointment there. And also, I'm trying to think what else, and I think the officiating has been very suspect throughout the season.
Yeah, I mean, you had a lot of good ones too, and I think if I had to expand a little bit, I think you're right. I mean, the topic when you mentioned the national anthem, the booing of that, not a big fan of that either. And I know exactly where you're going with this. I've got into a couple of really heated debates myself about this, but when you talk about disappointments, right? And this is what I've said, publicly and privately about this. When we do things like as grown-ups and everything, what I just say to people is like, your kids are watching what we do. The kids are watching how we behave, how we react. And I understand that, you may not be happy with the way things are going in the world. I don't know too many people that are, but I mean, our kids are watching what we're doing. And it just, I don't know, I just think it sets a terrible example to do that. So I completely agree with you on that. And, along with some of the other things that you said, I think you hit it spot on. The Four Nations tournament was awesome. And again, it's hard when we do a show like this, you want to stick to sports, right? But whether it's the national anthem or the Four Nations tournament, you can't really do it without getting into politics a little bit. The fact of the matter is, and again, there's a lot of people that aren't happy with some of the stuff that Russia is doing in the world and everything like that, but you can't market a tournament as the best of the best when one of the best teams in the world is not permitted to play. You just can't. And I think that, do I think the things would have turned out the same way if Russia was involved? I'm not so sure. But I agree with you that on that point as well. I think that it might have been a little bit different, maybe a little bit more exciting, too, if maybe they call it a Five Nations tournament. I don't know. But that's my thoughts.
Also, this coming as kind of a surprising and disappointing news about Artemi Panarin. I don't know if you saw that, Bruce. Having to settle a sexual assault, I believe. I forgot what. There was a alleged incident that happened with a Rangers employee, Artemi Panarin. Again, they settled out of court. That's all they're saying. As far as MSG and the NHL is concerned, that it's a done matter and all that kind of stuff. And it raises questions about the consistency and the integrity of the league, because we obviously have the Hockey Canada scandal, and how Artemi Panarin, again, don't know if it's true or not. There was a story in Russia that was allegedly debunked, but I'm not so sure about that, because there was never any kind of evidence of that, other than he disagreed with Putin on a couple things. And then now you see this allegation. Now it's starting to become a pattern. And they say it's settled out of court, but why is he not why is he still playing in the league? Those are kind of questions I want to ask, and leave it at that. Again, I didn't mean to have this podcast get into another issue, but to me, for surprise and disappointment, this had all the above. The story coming out this morning in the New York Post. Or I'm sorry, in The Athletic by Katie Strang, who is an investigative reporter and a very good one.
Yeah, and it's interesting when stories like that come out because I don't know if there's more details on it. But when you were talking about that, I was looking something up, and there's non-disclosure, no admission of wrongdoing clauses in the settlement and everything like that. And it'll be interesting to see if anything else comes out because if you recall, and it's a little bit different, but if you remember what happened to Corey Perry,
Yep.
um, I'm curious to see if there is a similar backlash.
Yeah, I mean, apparently what happened, and this was in the New York Post, that this alleged event where a Rangers employee, a woman, lost her phone. Apparently, a Panarin had it. Have her go to her his hotel room, and when you hear these stories, and it happens so often, Bruce, nothing good comes out of it.
Never, never.
And you can read the New York Post article. I'm not going to get into that.
Right.
And just reading this stuff, and it's like, well, the Michael McLeod, the Cal Foot, the Carter Hart, and all that it's like, is there a difference here or is there not? Like, I don't know. But again, this is one of the biggest surprise and disappointments, and it should be interesting. I believe the Rangers are playing tonight on that, but the Madison Square Garden, and I've been very critical of James Dolan. They have a history of this with the New York Knicks, the New York Rangers, even Dolan himself, in a lot of these lawsuits that come about. And again, there's always a presumption of innocence, but just when you hear so many of these stories, it makes you wonder. But anyway, switching gears, Bruce, picks for Jack Adams.
So, thank you, first of all, Sam. So, Jack Adams is the NHL's trophy for the Coach of the Year. And although the Washington Capitals had a fantastic year, and a lot of people are saying that Spencer Carberry with the Capitals is the clear choice for NHL Coach of the Year. I'm going to go a different route. I don't think the person I'm going to suggest is going to win, but I'm going to go with Scott Arniel from the Jets, the Winnipeg Jets. I think that he did a fantastic job this year, as did Spencer Carberry. I mean, the Capitals had a fantastic year. But I'm going to go with Scott Arniel from the Jets, but a lot of folks are going with Carberry from the Capitals.
I'm going to go wild card here because I have to. I'm going Jim Montgomery because I'd love to have that. He was fired early in the year, but hired by the St. Louis Blues and got him into the playoffs. I think that's pretty cool.
And it's funny. That's a great choice. It really is a great choice. It's a smart pick. And I'll tell you why. We mentioned this on the show once before too, Sam. It would be the first time in NHL history that a coach has been fired, and if it happens, and won Coach of the Year award in NHL history. And it's I don't think it's going to happen, but it's a definite possibility. And, I want to take a step back, for a second about what we were talking about, the Bruins and everything like that. They did not have a good year the way they handled a lot of stuff. But, I mean, for Jim Montgomery to come out on top like that would be amazing. I feel bad for the guy. I think and I've said this before, like you've been critical of certain things. I mean, I think it's time for a new voice at the head of the Bruins. I think it's time for a new management team because the way they've done things with coaches, with players, with drafting, the whole Mitch Miller fiasco and everything, I think it's just time for a new voice. But it would be a great story to see Jim Montgomery win that. So it's a great pick.
Yeah, it's kind of like Bruce Cassidy had his moment.
Yeah,
when he was fired by the Boston Bruins, but it didn't sting as much for the Bruins fans because he had Jim Montgomery coming in. So and he did very well, especially in the regular season. But this, I mean, I would love for Jim Montgomery to win it because it would just add to the venom of what Bruins fans are facing right now. Because a lot of these things that have happened was not even necessary. It was all self-inflicted. Firing Jim Montgomery, again, we're not in the inside, Bruce, of what actually happened. And then trading Marchand as well when he wanted to stay. And also I read an article as well about a little girl that was going through stage 4 cancer, and her last wish was her wish was to meet Brad Marchand, but he had already been traded. So the father wrote a letter to Marchand, hoping that his daughter would get that last wish. And what happened was crickets, because you don't know where that letter goes. And then finally the nurse of that hospital put it out on social media. One thing led to another. Fans were commenting to Marchand about this story, and Marchand found out about it. Not only he went out of his way, because at this point he's in Florida right now. Went out of his way to go meet this girl, not just for a minute, but for an entire afternoon, spend time with her. And obviously gave her a jersey and all that kind of stuff, while being a Florida Panther, even though she's a Boston Bruins fan and all that kind of stuff. And I thought that was really, really touching. Like, it was really, when you read that article, I don't have it. When I was dead scrolling, I read it. Really cool story.
It's an amazing story. I hadn't heard that either, but it shows, it just shows the type of person that he is, and that's a pretty classy thing to do. I mean, the joy that he was able to bring that little girl, that's, again, you look at things like that, and I'm one of those people when it comes to, and you and I have talked about this before. I know I understand more than anybody else, as do you, that this is a business, and people need to remember that. I hate saying that because I say it a lot, but it's a results-driven business. However, just like with Marty on the Devils, I think there are certain players that somebody's got to step in, whether it's ownership, and say, listen, this is not a good idea. I think that trading Marchand was a terrible idea. I mean, the Bruins, I don't think we're going to make the playoffs anyway. I think, maybe they would have gotten a few more wins.
I'll tell you what. I have an opinion about this. If you own a team and it's all business, your brand, it's all about the brand.
Right?
And why would you have your brand, like the New Jersey Devils, allow Marty Brodeur to have any kind of record with the St. Louis Blues as a player? No offense to that organization.
No, none.
Or even Marchand to the Florida Panthers. Now, Ray Bourque was a different situation.
Completely.
That was completely different situation. That was agreed upon, and that was best for the brand and Ray Bourque personally. That's and I'm just shocked that, again, in an age where we're all fixated by numbers like analytics, money, quantifying pluses and losses and gains and all that kind of crap, that at the end of the day, if you're the Boston Bruins, what are you selling your fans? You're selling what it's like to be a Boston Bruin, and Marchand represents all that with class off the ice. On the ice, the licking and all that kind of stuff, that's another story. But he's a Boston Bruin. And there are times where you have to, let's just say, that's the price of doing business. Suck it up, pay the guy, forget about the results. Because long term, 20, 30, 50 years after retirement, he's one of the pillars of the franchise as a player on that Mount Rushmore of Boston Bruins players, to go along with Bobby Orr and all these other players that played for the Boston Bruins. That's just my opinion.
And you're entirely right. And that's you have a smart commentary, as you usually do. A smart commentary.
If you ask my wife, I don't. But anyway,
you're a very knowledgeable hockey analyst, and that's, you make a lot of good points. when I look at this, and maybe I'm a little bit more cynical than a lot of people, I think stuff like that happens sometimes when you've got a disconnected ownership group,
Yep.
and you can't have that. I mean, and again, no disrespect to any other team, but like if you're the Devils ownership at the time, how on earth does somebody not step in and say, listen, guy brought us 3 cups. We're not letting him go somewhere else. Like you said, suck it up. Let him do his thing. And then whether it's a year or however long it was, I mean, you're not talking 3 years here. You're talking, with Marty's case, what, another half season? You let him ride it out.
Especially when you've got the 2015, 2016 draft and being in the lottery. If Marty's having a down years and you have that lottery pick, you could have had an extra ping pong ball for Connor McDavid, Jack Eichel, and even Austin Matthews in those 2 drafts. But instead, you had the 6th overall in 2015, and then the 2016, I think they had 12th overall.
I think you might be right about that. But the other thing too, this is kind of getting off topic a little bit, but you're also, by doing that, you're also putting Corey Schneider, who came in after Marty, you're in the eyes of some fans, you're putting him in a bad spot because, listen, let's be honest, and you and I think, are on the same page with this. At least I think we are. Like, I think Marty is the greatest goalie that ever played the game. I think he's the best, and in me, there's not even a discussion as to why he is, but I think he is. You could have had Jesus come in behind him, and that person would have been in a bad spot because you're following the greatest goalie that ever lived, right? And I have a lot of friends who don't do what you and I do, but a lot of people feel that well, Marty was kind of forced out, and Corey came in, and they didn't root for the guy because of that. You could have avoided all of that by just saying and do like the whole farewell tour, like Marc-Andre Fleury's getting with Minnesota.
Yeah,
and you could have had. But getting back to Marchand, I just don't know how, if your ownership, you allow that to happen. Yeah. I don't understand it, because it just, I mean, we talked about Jim Montgomery. How awesome would it be if Marchand comes back and, scores the Stanley Cup winning goal with Florida?
Yep.
Talk about venom.
Yeah.
And like you said, some of the on-ice stuff, the licking and everything like that, it's, probably not great. But I don't know anybody.
It's entertaining. I'll tell you that.
Not only is it entertaining, but let's be honest. There's no other analyst that I talk to, and you and I both talk to a bunch of them, that wouldn't take him on your team in a heartbeat because of what he brings. Okay?
Of course.
So and when you watch him, I think being in the media, not just this, but doing the other stuff that I do. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm a pretty good judge of people. If you watch him, he was broken. He was like almost distraught being traded because he wanted to stay there.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I don't know how you feel about this, but when I saw that, I'm like, man, they botched this one. They really did. They really did. So, not to pick on the Boston Bruins, but I just think that was a terrible move.
Okay. Well, before we get into the series, the playoff series, but just one last thing. I just for a long time, since 2013, I felt that there was no need for the Devils to trade for Corey Schneider at that draft. I think you should have stuck with Moose Hedberg for one more year, Marty Brodeur, and let Marty Brodeur ride it out to the sunset, knowing that Connor McDavid was in that 2015 draft, 2 years ahead of schedule. I think part of it was Lou was trying to have one last gasp as a GM for the next round and was trying to prepare, which I don't blame him for. Hindsight's 2020. And it's no knock on Corey Schneider. I just felt that the Devils' chances of getting Schneider without giving up a draft pick, that 9th overall, wasn't free agency a couple years later. I just did not see why they needed to trade him then. I thought the timing was off. And again, I wonder what could have been if the Devils were that bad in the 2014-15 season and 15-16 season, how high they would have been up in those 2 drafts. I always wondered about that. But
yeah, it's a good point. You don't know. I mean, the thing with Lou, as you know, Sam, is he always wanted to field a competitive team. He always wanted to try to make the playoffs, but that's not always in the best interest of the team. I mean, just, never mind Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews. Let's go back a couple of years and talk about how the Devils could have had Mario Lemieux instead of Kirk Muller.
Yep. So, all right. So Stanley Cup playoffs. The seeding's out. We got the Washington Capitals playing the Montreal Canadiens, who clinched yesterday, knocking off the BJs for that last wild card spot. You've got in the Eastern Conference as well, Toronto Maple Leafs and Ottawa Senators. I think that's going to be a bloodbath. That's got to go 7. That's got to go 7 games.
Yeah, there's going to be a little. There's going to be some hard feelings in that series. Let's say that.
Yeah. I like the Florida series. Tampa Bay Lightning and Florida Panthers. The battle of supremacy of the Sunshine State. I love that series. That's going to be a nice one for both franchises, being the Florida Panthers being the Stanley Cup champions of last season. And obviously the Carolina Hurricanes and the New Jersey Devils as well. Brett Pesce, Dougie Hamilton, Stefan Nason playing their old team. Carolina Hurricanes being spurned by Rantanen, but looking to prove themselves. Rod Brindamore, after all the veterans that he lost, will still be able to get his team in the home ice advantage and, still fielding a very competitive team. Now, in the West, your Winnipeg Jets, who I love their entrance during the playoffs when they play Top Gun and there's white smoke everywhere and there's just this buildup and the announcer's like, "Your Winnipeg Jets," and the Winnipeg fans just go absolutely nuts. And the St. Louis Blues, Jim Montgomery, they got a chip on his shoulder. I mean, they shouldn't be in the playoffs, but they are. I think St. Louis is dangerous. That's going to be a great series. Dallas and Colorado. Rantanen playing his old teammates. You got Cal McCarr, you got Heiskanen, Golte, Ottinger. This is going to be a great series. Peter DeBoer, Dallas Star. Again, this is great. The Minnesota Wild and the Vegas Golden Knights, a Fleury playing against his old former team as well. They love Flower as well, but obviously he won't be in net. But, hey, enjoy the ride on that one. And then the Kings Oilers. I always loved the Kings and Oilers when they play, even though it's been, 35 years since that big trade.
Yeah.
But which series do you I love all the above here, but I really this is a tough one. It's a tough one. Which one I like the most? But I'll let you go first. Which one you're most excited to see?
Excuse me. Well, I tell you, there's a few of them that I think are going to be amazing. I think, like you said, I think Toronto, Ottawa is going to be it's going to be a hell of a series.
Bloodbath.
Tampa Bay and Florida, I think, is going to be a bloodbath as well.
Yep.
The one that I'm really looking forward to season, just because of you want to talk about venom, Dallas and Colorado. Mikko Rantanen against his former team. Colorado. Listen, we're talking about teams that have botched stuff. My goodness, the trade with Colorado sending him to Carolina and then him not wanting to be there and all this other stuff, and then get traded right back into not only the conference but the division.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how that's going to look for Colorado management if Rantanen has like 15 points in that series and eliminates him? So that's the one that I'm really looking forward to watching, because I think there's 3 series where there's going to be just some serious bad feelings. Dallas and Colorado, Toronto and Ottawa, and Tampa Bay and Florida, I think are going to be I think there are going to be high penalty minute contests. Well,
and there's also the storylines of getting over the hump Will the Toronto Maple Leafs under Craig Berube get over the hump and get in the second round, right? Also, getting over the hump, let's see here. Connor Hellebuck and the Winnipeg Jets. Can he score, go far in these playoffs? He's the number one goaltender, in my mind, in the NHL right now. And he is elite. But during the playoffs, I mean, sometimes they get the yips a little bit, these goaltenders. Again, can they get over the hump? And, Connor McDavid last season got over the hump and got within a goal of winning the Stanley Cup. He was that close. He got over the hump last season. So, there's a lot of storylines here, and I think the Dallas Colorado series out of the West is my must see, and I would go with Ottawa and Toronto only because it's two Canadian teams and the passion is going to be just through the roof.
Yeah, there's nothing to our followers and listeners that have not ever had the honor of checking out a Canadian hockey game, or especially a Canadian playoff game. There's nothing like it. It's absolutely amazing. And, like you said, Sam, there's a couple of teams, if you look at the playoff brackets, that really, they've got more pressure on them to do things than, people are like, this is a first-round series. Toronto really needs to do something in the playoffs. They've had a couple of failures. They need to do something. Winnipeg really does also. And if you look at the teams that they're playing, Ottawa and St. Louis are really playing with house money. I mean, they really are. I mean, the Blues went on a tear, to get into the playoffs. And to me, if you're coaching Winnipeg or Toronto, you got to worry because you mentioned the yips, Sam, and those are just prime series for that to happen. Linus Ullmark for Ottawa can come in and steal a series. My God, can you imagine what the Toronto media is going to be like if they lose that series?
Oh, I know. And Sheldon Keefe gets over the hump and gets to the second round and upsets the Carolina Hurricanes. I mean, there's a lot of storylines. You and I are not going to get any sleep here because there's just so many great games. Like, I don't even know what to do when I've got 4 games on at once. It's like it's going to be absolutely crazy.
And the storyline.
Yeah.
Storyline.
Yeah, but we'll have it covered. And, all right, so rounding out Devils, Carolina, see the series preview. Just to let a programming note that the State of the Fan address, pucksandpitchforks.com, editor-in-chief Nick Vallon and I will be doing a playoff preview later tonight, but we're going to do one here. So, what are your thoughts? How these two teams match up? I think it's even. I think it's so even that, I know the Devils haven't been playing well, but same with the Carolina Hurricanes. They haven't been playing well either.
Yeah, neither team has really been playing that well. And, it's one of those things. I think there's more on the line actually for Carolina in this series, and I'll tell you why. You're right. The Devils have really not been playing well. They had a terrible game. I guess it was last night against Detroit. They looked awful. They beat the Bruins the night before. I think it was the night before, 5-4. And then they had a couple of, bad games before that. Devils don't have Jack Hughes. They don't have Jonas Siegenthaler. A lot of people are writing them off, especially the media. I was looking at that earlier today. There's a lot of people that think that Carolina is going to win the series in 4 or 5 games. That doesn't really surprise me, but the thing is, that's another situation where if Carolina takes New Jersey lightly, they could very easily Montreal, although that's another series where Montreal kind of playing with house money. They got into it on Montreal kind of playing with house money. They got into it on the last game or the second to last game of the season. That could have upset written all over it too.
Yep.
But I think that Carolina is probably going to win this series in 6 games. But I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's all about territorial positioning for both teams. Who can get in that slot and do some damage? Who's willing to pay the price to play the north-south game and go straight to the net. And I think that's where it all boils down to. I think both teams can forecheck heavily. I think both teams can skate. I think both teams have a tremendous amount of skill. It's going to come down to really positioning and goaltending. And I think that's where Markstrom has the edge if he plays up to his ability. It's not to say that Carolina can't. It's just they've been very inconsistent with their defense and goaltending to the point where you can't really rely on that. The playoffs is a different animal. Now, if Carolina can shore up their defense and goaltending in round one, I think they'll take the series. But I think it's going to go 7. I think it's going to go 7, and it's going to surprise a lot of people. It could go either way. I hate to cop out, but I think it could go either way. But it's got to go 7.
I don't think you're wrong because I think the Devils have an advantage over the Hurricanes in goaltending. I think Jacob Markstrom is much better than what the Hurricanes have. And again, if you got to remember, Sam, too, he was hurt a little bit this year. And earlier in the season, when we were talking about our picks for Vezina, earlier in the year before he got hurt, Markstrom was in the discussion for the Vezina Trophy.
Yeah.
If you remember that. So, he will probably be motivated to have a very good, offseason. And if he does, postseason rather, and if he does, I mean, I do agree with you. I mean, the Devils could easily take this series. I don't think they will, but listen, and as you mentioned, you've got Dougie Hamilton, you've got Stefan Nason, and, I think they're going to be motivated to kind of stick it to their former team. So we'll see what happens. I think it's going to be a good series, though.
Yeah, it's going to be a great series. And, all right, Bruce, well, enjoyed talking to you as always. Lots of stuff to talk about. I'll tell you, next Tuesday, there's going to be a lot of things to talk about. We're going to have to figure out the scheduling of it because the Devils are playing 6 p.m. Eastern on that Tuesday in Carolina. So we'll have to do some finagle with the scheduling of At the Point. But I want to thank all those tuning in to this podcast. Remember, 8:30 p.m. Eastern tonight, the State of the Fan address will be going on, talking more Devils hockey. We got it covered, folks. We got it covered. And also, I'll be live at American Whiskey on the big stage for the playoffs. We are in playoff mode, folks. Lots of coverage, lots to talk about. Everybody, all hands on deck. Bruce, love this time of year. Till next time, this is At the Point. Let's go Devils.